One way exists to get the job done. Future experimentation may uncover even more methods for using sound to overcome the force of gravity, and some of them may be more potent than the techniques developed so far. One theory credits the building of the pyramids and other megalithic monuments to acoustic levitation. No first-hand accounts exist, but later written testimony provides some intriguing and suggestive clues. Abul Hassan Ali al-Masudi, an Arab historian from the 10th century AD, wrote about ancient Egypt and the methods he alleges they used to move massive stones, including those used to build the pyramids. He claimed that a magic papyrus imprinted with symbols was placed under each stone, after which a metal rod was struck against the stone to initiate the levitation process. According to al-Masudi, the stone would be guided along a fenced path with metal poles placed on each side. Some believe these poles could have been used to create high-frequency sound vibrations, which would have been responsible for creating the levitation effects. Outside of this written testimony, which is open to interpretation, there is no direct evidence to suggest the pyramids were constructed by acoustic levitation. But the Great Pyramid of Giza does possess some extraordinary acoustic properties, demonstrating the capacity to dramatically amplify sounds generated at certain frequencies. The Egyptians who built the pyramids on the Giza Plateau clearly knew a lot about sound, and knew how it could be used to produce powerful effects, possibly including levitation. Another creation that some have credited to sonic or acoustic levitation is the Coral Castle, which is located in southeastern Florida, not far from the city of Miami. The Coral Castle is a sprawling stone city built by Latvian-American immigrant Edward Litzkalnin between the years 1923 and 1951. The Coral Castle complex is constructed from nearly 1,000 tons of rock, which Litzkalnin somehow cut, shaped, lifted and maneuvered into place all by himself. Litzkalnin refused to allow visitors or observers on site while he was working, so there are no eyewitness accounts detailing his construction methods. There were no reports of mysterious sounds coming from the vicinity of the Coral Castle during the construction phase, but sonic levitation generally relies on the use of sound frequencies that are inaudible to humans. In his writings and conversations, Litzkalnin never specifically identified sound as a key factor in his work. But it is known that he had an interest in radio and possessed a range of radio equipment, which he used for unknown purposes. Litzkalnin at one point told someone he knew how to tune into the music of the stars, a reference that could have either literal or metaphorical connotations. In explaining his amazing feats, the perpetually enigmatic Litzkalnin proclaimed the following: "I have discovered the secrets of the pyramids, and have found out how the Egyptians and the ancient builders in Peru, Yucatan and Asia, with only primitive tools, raised and set in place blocks of stone weighing many tons. There is an implication here that somehow these ancient masters had developed a method for overcoming the force of gravity. Just exactly how Litzkalnin would have discovered the secrets of the ancients is unknown. Many anecdotal tales of acoustic levitation come from travelers in the Far East, who claim to have encountered mystics or ascetics who possess the ability to levitate objects, sometimes with the assistance of sound. One fascinating story came from a medical doctor named Jarl, who had been brought to a remote area of Tibet in 1939 to treat a Tibetan Buddhist holy man suffering from an unknown illness. After spending some time among the monks, he eventually gained their confidence, and to show their appreciation, they performed a demonstration in sonic levitation that left Dr. Jarl astounded. In a clearing, the monks arranged 19 musical instruments, 13 drums and 6 trumpets, in a 90-degree arc around a large, heavy stone. On cue, they began to play these instruments in unison, singing and chanting at the same time. After a few moments, the stone suddenly lifted into the air, and it continued to rise until it landed on a hilltop perch approximately 250 meters above the ground. The demonstration was repeated multiple times for Dr. Jarl, who claimed the films he made of this procedure were confiscated by the English Scientific Society, which had sponsored his trip to Asia. The drawings Dr. Jarl made of this procedure have survived to this day, although the films he allegedly made have never surfaced. A few years ago, sonic drilling technology was developed by NASA as a means to mine materials from rocks and other hard materials encountered on space missions. This helped boost interest in the capacity of sound to generate force, including the power necessary to levitate physical objects. Compared to stories of heavy stones lifted high into the air by chanting and drum-playing monks, the achievements of 21st century scientists may not seem impressive. But they do show that sound waves can be used to accomplish amazing things, and controlled experiments are more authoritative than unproven anecdotes from the distant past. Acoustic levitation is real, and as scientists learn more about how it works, their ability to harness it will likely advance by leaps and bounds.
Mamma mia! Going up? Say what?
Renovations at Lincoln Cathedral unearth 50 mysterious medieval burials. Before we start, please take a moment to give this video a like, subscribe to Glass World Mysteries, and hit the bell icon so you'll never miss these great stories. Mysterious burials have been found underneath England's iconic Lincoln Cathedral. 4 years ago, archaeologists, historians, and other experts began excavating and renovating the Lincoln Cathedral in the East Midlands, UK. This city is known as Cathedral City, and the Lincoln Cathedral is the area's most prized Gothic landmark. So far, in an amazing surprise, archaeologists have uncovered more than 50 graves. Most recently, one of a medieval priest, a rare find that dates back to the 12th or 13th century. In addition to the priest's remains, archaeologists have found a pewter chalice and other objects used when giving communion during Mass. Other objects found in addition to skeletal remains include a hand from an ancient statue and a very rare coin. The coin bears the image of Edward the Confessor, who was the last king of Wessex and ruled from 1042 until 1066. This project, begun in 2016, was not started solely for archaeological purposes, but rather to allow for the installation of new sewage and drainage pipes, landscaping, and of course refurbishment of the cathedral. The work is being funded by the National Lottery. Later this year, the relics found will be put on exhibit in the new Lincoln Cathedral Visitor Center, which officials hope will open sometime this summer. Archaeologists have also discovered important and historic ancient Roman buildings in the vicinity of the coming visitor center. They found ornate wall plaster, an almost perfectly preserved incense burner, a Roman spoon, and a container used for perfume. The plaster, though not complete, has a detailed pattern of leaves and flowers on part of it. On the other parts are colored bands. Experts hope to eventually be able to recreate the walls in their entirety. Natasha Powers is a senior manager with Allen Archaeology, the firm in charge of the excavation. She's been on the project since the beginning and recently told the media, "Since our work began in 2016, we've uncovered significant evidence of Lincoln's medieval, Saxon, and Roman past. The objects we found are not only beautiful and interesting in themselves, but importantly, they enable us to better interpret the lives of those who occupied the city in previous centuries." Work on the cathedral and the excavations currently underway are scheduled for completion by 2022. It isn't only what's beneath the cathedral's grounds that's incredibly important to historians. The church itself is, and has been for centuries, a vital part of this community that today is home to almost 95,000 people. The renovations had a budget of more than £12 million, but already costs are predicted to exceed that. According to Ann Irving, who is the project manager of the church, the restoration was important to the community as the archaeological dig happened on its doorstep. In May 2019, Irving told Telegraph News website, "We're building out the Lincolnshire limestone, which is like a hard cheese. There's a lot of intricate Gothic carving which weathers and bits fall off." Still, Irving said, the work is necessary, not just for churchgoers today, but for those who attend the church in the future. "We're not just thinking about our generation," she told the Telegraph, "but the generations beyond us and what they'll have to face if the repairs are not tended to now." And churchgoers are not the only folks who love the Lincoln Cathedral. TV and movie producers love it too. In 2005, the church stood in, so to speak, for Westminster Abbey in the film The Da Vinci Code, starring Tom Hanks. So while costs for the renovation and the archaeological dig may rise, so will the cathedral's fame and profile. And perhaps visitors to the UK will make a point of going to Lincoln, seeing the cathedral, and visiting the town. That means tourism, which means money flowing into local businesses. Perhaps they'll stop in at the visitor center and see the exhibit of the ancient priest excavated recently and the artifacts found with him. When history and economics combine, it can mean a win-win for everyone involved.
archaeologists in San El Hagar have discovered hundreds of colored and inscribed limestone blocks, which they believe were used to build the sacred lake walls of a temple dedicated to the goddess Mut. The limestone blocks may have belonged to King Asorkan II of the 22nd dynasty, and used for either a temple or chapel, announced Dr. Zarti Hawass, Minister of State for Antiquities today. The stone may have also been reused in the late period and the Ptolemaic era. Dr. Hawass added that following a complete excavation and study of the blocks, the French mission would reconstruct the original arrangement to determine if they are from a temple or chapel. Dr. Philippe Brissot, director of the French mission, confirmed that the sacred lake measures about 30 meters by 12 meters, with a depth of 6 meters. The team has so far cleaned about 120 blocks, 78 of which have inscriptions. 2 blocks belong to King Asorkan III, while the inscriptions mention the title Mistress Mut of Asheru Lake, indicating both goddess and lake during the 21st and 22nd dynasties. Dr. Muhammad Abdul Maqsid, head of office at the Ministry of State for Antiquities, said that this discovery adds great importance to the San El Hagar site, one of the most archaeologically rich areas of the Delta, known as the Thebes of the North. The region is a huge priority for the Ministry of State for Antiquities to lower the water table, control agricultural drainage, and build an open-site museum, complete with visitors center, tourist facilities and a museum magazine. General Manager of Sharkio Archaeological Sites, mentioned that San El Hagar, Tanis during the Pharaonic era, 70 kilometers northeast of Zagazig city, is one of the oldest Egyptian cities, and contains many temples belonging to the god Amun. It was the capital of Egypt during the 21st and 22nd dynasties. Excavation work began at this site in 1860 by Auguste Mariette, followed in 1884 by Flinders Petrie, who discovered the temple of Amun inside the old city. From 1928 to 1958, a French mission directed by Pierre Montet excavated the temples of Mut and Horus, and the treasure of the royal necropolis, currently on display at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Now under the direction of Dr. Philippe Brissot, the inscriptions of this latest discovery are thought to be amongst the best quality reliefs to be found in Egypt. The mysterious Chinese people who disappeared overnight. According to the story, all the Chinese people who disappeared during a night in 1987, not only the people, about 10,000, but also their cats, dogs, and even cattle. Apparently, there were no signs of what had happened, and all the houses seemed to have been evicted quickly, with meals prepared on tables and abandoned belongings. But this was only the beginning, as reports began to appear that claimed that in the days before the disappearance, there had been numerous UFO sightings in the area. On one occasion, some neighbors allegedly saw an 8-light formation in the sky just above the town for about half an hour, and caused the clouds to turn black, before emitting a bright purple flash and a loud explosion. In the strange world of disappearances and people who have apparently ceased to exist, there is the phenomenon of peoples who simply vanished for no apparent reason. To think that a whole population can disappear without a trace is really scary, which in turn causes all kinds of speculation about what might have happened. But whoever thinks that it is quite difficult for a town to disappear has to know that there have been well-documented cases throughout our history, such as Roanoke Colony on Roanoke Island, in Dare County, now North Carolina, United States, and Jacuni, the missing Eskil in Canada overnight. Located in a region of central China, in the province of Shaanxi, which extends 205,800 square kilometers and covers the majestic Wei Valley, Lodz Plateau, the Muas Desert, and the Qin Mountains. And this place was a rural town like any other that was in the region, with nothing particularly out of the ordinary or exceptional, apart from its proximity to a rocket launch center. But in 2010, a great stir was formed in Chinese social networks, when the story of how this small town disappeared completely from the face of the earth became known. They also said that the area was infested with snakes shortly before the town disappeared for unknown reasons, and the reason why the case was not known until 23 years later was that the Chinese government covered up the incident. According to the new Tang Dynasty television media, the inhabitants were transferred in the middle of the night as part of an operation that would link to a secret project, probably of a military nature, although, supposedly, there is a nuclear base buried somewhere deep in the mountains. A large number of troops were sent to the place. All the people were taken to another place during the night, including people and animals. The mysterious operation had a code name, Operation Nightcat. Some witnesses even claimed to have seen people climbing in military trucks. In addition, in the days after the disappearance of the town, numerous military vehicles, tanks, and even missile launchers appeared in the area, which caused all kinds of speculation, from cover-ups of a disaster to UFOs. Of course, the Chinese government completely denied having participated in the mysterious disappearance of the people. Given that these stories have their origin in social networks, along with Chinese internet censorship, anyone can think that it is only an urban legend, fueled by the total inability to corroborate the stories. But we must also remember how disasters concealed by the Chinese government have occurred, such as the famous catastrophe of March 3, 1996, in Zhejiang. Details about the worst rocket launch accident in history are only known because it was witnessed by numerous foreign experts. As Air and Space Smithsonian Magazine reported in 2013, the town near the launch center disappeared, as if it never existed. At present, there is no monument to the victims, and its history has never been mentioned in the state-controlled Chinese press. But it must also be said that the case of the Shaanxi people is completely different, especially because of the strange lights in the sky, the appearance of several UFOs, and dozens of snakes sliding down the mountains to protect themselves from a seemingly invisible danger. In the end, we only have more questions than answers. Did this town really disappear without a trace during the night? And if so, why? Was he evacuated by the military for unknown reasons? UFOs were supposedly seen? Is it just a conspiracy? An urban legend or reality?
Alright, so now I need to work on the skin.
Warsaw, Poland. As Polish river levels fall to record lows amid a prolonged drought, the material remains of Poland's tortured 20th century history are coming to light on newly exposed riverbeds, the human remains of Soviet fighter pilots and their plane being found in recent days. Those discoveries follow that of stone fragments from the early 20th century Poniatowski Bridge across the Vistula River in Warsaw, which the Germans blew up in 1944. The Vistula River is hiding no end of secrets. They are everywhere, said Johnny Daniels, who waded into a shallow area of the Vistula on Tuesday, picking up fragments of stones with Hebrew lettering. Officials knew that archaeological remnants remained hidden under wild and murky waters of the Vistula River or its tributaries, but it was impossible to carry out searches for them until now. Amid a prolonged drought, the Vistula, which flows 1,047 kilometers from the Beskidi Mountains to the Baltic Sea, is at its lowest level since measurements started in the late 18th century, leading explorers and fortune hunters to comb riverbanks across the country. On Sunday, explorers found the remnant of the Soviet fighter-bomber plane in the Bzura River, a tributary of the Vistula, near the village of Kamień in central Poland. The pieces have been moved to a museum in nearby Wyszegrád for examination, with more recovery work planned for Saturday. The head of the museum, Zdzislaw Oszczynski, told the Associated Press that parts of Soviet uniforms, a parachute, a sheepskin coat collar, parts of boots, a pilot's personal TT pistol and radio equipment were found. The inscriptions on the control panel and on the radio equipment are in Cyrillic. The uncovered remnants are part of the larger story of a devastating war that played out across Poland from 1939 to 1945. Warsaw, Poland. As Polish river levels fall to record lows amid a prolonged drought, the material remains of Poland's tortured 20th century history are coming to light on newly exposed riverbeds, the human remains of Soviet fighter pilots and their plane being found in recent days. Those discoveries follow that of stone fragments from the early 20th century Poniatowski Bridge across the Vistula River in Warsaw, which the Germans blew up in 1944. The Vistula River is hiding no end of secrets. They are everywhere, said Johnny Daniels, who waded into a shallow area of the Vistula on Tuesday, picking up fragments of stones with Hebrew lettering. Officials knew that archaeological remnants remained hidden under wild and murky waters of the Vistula River or its tributaries, but it was impossible to carry out searches for them until now. Amid a prolonged drought, the Vistula, which flows 1,047 kilometers from the Beskidi Mountains to the Baltic Sea, is at its lowest level since measurements started in the late 18th century, leading explorers and fortune
Abandoned places come in many different shapes and sizes. Some of them are so badly broken down and beaten up that they make us feel sad. Others look a little creepy when we come across them in the dark. Then there are those that fill us with a sense of wonder. Sometimes when all the people have gone away, there can be something fabulous and mystical about a place that's been left to fend for itself. Here are some of the most mystical abandoned places on Earth. Standing alone on the East Gippsland coast of Victoria in Australia is a lighthouse known as Point Hicks. It's one of the very few warning beacons available to ships passing on the South Tasman Sea, and can be seen as far away as the Bass Strait when it lights up. You won't find any light keepers inside it, though. The lighthouse was built in 1887 and manned until 1965, when it was finally connected to mains electricity. That did away with the need for permanent occupants, and the former lighthouse keepers' quarters have been let out as holiday homes ever since. You'd be brave to stay here, though. Aside from the fact that it's in a very remote location, the lighthouse is also said to be haunted by the ghost of a former keeper known as Christopherson, who fell to his death down the spiral staircase during the early 20th century. You might not think you believe in ghosts, but when you're alone in Christopherson's quarters at night and you hear creaking on the stairs, you may soon find yourself questioning that belief. Baldoon Castle in Scotland looked magnificent when it was built during the 16th century. Perhaps that isn't surprising. The creation of the building and the establishment of the land around it was a gift to the Dunbar family from King James V. So all of the construction work was performed to the standard where it was fit for a king. These days, it's not quite so impressive. The Dunbar family moved out in the year 1800 after almost 300 years of occupation, and since then, it's been allowed to crumble into ruins, with thick ivy growing through the brickwork everywhere you look. The people who live locally to the castle in the Dumfries and Galloway region of Scotland insist that you'll see something else if you look a little closer, though. Allegedly, the ghost of a furious woman called Janet Dalrymple runs through the tower in a blood-stained wedding dress. As the story goes, she was forced to marry Sir David Dunbar, despite the fact she was already in love with the 3rd Lord Rutherford, and was murdered on her wedding night because of her protestations. We're traveling to Siberia now for our next mystical experience in an abandoned place, and we'll find it inside Kashkalak Cave, if you're bold enough to enter this eerie hole in the rock in the Kaskaskia region. This foreboding place has picked up several nicknames over the years, such as the Cave of the White Shaman and the Cave of the Black Devil. None of the nicknames imply that it's a place you'd want to spend much time. Inside the cave, there's evidence that human sacrifices were carried out atop a phallic altar by unknown people many centuries ago. The tale of the cave gets worse from there. You have to climb up 2,000 feet above sea level to get in, but the moment you're in, you start heading down again, disappearing 1,500 feet into the bowels of the mountain. There are stories that say once you're in the deepest chamber, you can hear the thoughts of every other human being on the planet, and that the experience will drive you insane. That's where the cave gets its name, from Kashkulak, translates as Kakash, as many years. There are underground tunnels under almost every nation in Europe, and some of them are more worthwhile to look at than others. There's definitely something to be said for the Ghost Bus Tunnel in Belgium. Don't let the name put you off. Unlike the other examples we've looked at so far, the ghosts here are more metaphorical than literal. The tunnel was initially devised as part of an ambitious new subway project that never came to fruition. The project ran out of money, and the city of Liège was left with a 2-mile-long tunnel running beneath it that was never going to use. Rather than close it up or block it off, they decided to allow the local transport service to store old, unwanted vehicles inside. There are dozens of disused vehicles hiding down there in the dark, some of which date all the way back to 1912. There have been numerous discussions about opening the tunnel to the public and turning it into a transport museum. But so far that hasn't happened, and the only people who get to go in and take a closer look are urban explorers. We're grateful to them for these pictures. You might have heard the name Glastonbury before. The small town in Somerset, England, plays host to the world's biggest music festival and attracts hundreds of thousands of revelers every time the festival opens its doors. While the visitors are there, a few of them take the time to travel to Glastonbury Tor, which is considered one of the most mystic locations in England. Legend has it that the Holy Grail was once hidden inside either this hill or the tower on top of it. Another fantastical version of history says that King Arthur sleeps under the hill and will awake when his country needs him the most. The tower has been standing since the 14th century, but Neolithic flint tools and Iron Age relics found at the site confirm that people have gathered here since prehistoric times. The ancient Britons referred to it as the Isle of Avalon, which might connect to the Avalon of Arthurian legend. All of these tales seem fanciful, but almost everyone who's visited the Tor and stood in the tower describes the experience as a spiritual one. Perhaps it's the fact that multiple ley lines meet at the point of the Tor, or maybe it's all the tales of magic and the beautiful scenery. Returning to the mysterious underground tunnels of mainland Europe, we now find ourselves in Czechia to check out the beautiful catacombs of Hlava. Nobody really knows how long these tunnels have been here, but many experts believe they were created by the same German colonists who founded the town during the 13th century. There have been stories of ghostly goings-on in the dark of the tunnels for many years, and even some of the experts who visited the tunnels in an attempt to dispel the myths have been forced to concede that there's something strange happening down there. Some visitors claim to have seen physical apparitions in the tunnels, whereas others saw nothing but heard inexplicable organ music as they wandered around. Taking a more pragmatic point of view, it seems that the first 3 levels of the catacombs were used as food and water storage, with living space provided on the lower levels. If we assume that it was fully populated at one time, this must have been a whole underground town. Why was it built? Who might have been living down here? Honestly, we don't know. But that organ music is bizarre, and no explanation for it has ever been found. You might have noticed by now that there's a recurring theme of ghosts in our mystical abandoned places. So let's cut to the chase and go straight to the most haunted castle in the world. That's Chillingham Castle in Northumberland, England. And if any castle on the planet is likely to be haunted, it's this one. There's a long and grisly history of executions at the castle going all the way back to the 12th century, with some especially brutal methods of torture and killing carried out within its walls. The castle's central torture chamber is still open to visitors today, and all who attend are horrified by features like the sloping floor, which was angled to allow the blood of torture victims to drain away faster. Some of the old tools of the trade are still present in the dungeon, like the executioner's block, racks, thumb screws, and an implement designed to gouge out the eyes. There are said to be dozens of ghosts roaming the castle, but the so-called Pink Room is a particular hotspot, said to be haunted by the specter known as the Blue Boy, who usually manifests as a series of bright blue lights. As strange, beautiful, or frightening as an abandoned castle might be, there's something even stranger about walking around a whole abandoned village. They tend to be a little harder to find because we have a habit of building new settlements on top of the ruins of old ones. But they exist if you look hard enough. Here's one not far from Salo in Finland, known as Suomusjärvi. The timber and brick houses have been boarded up and left abandoned for most of the last century, and there appears to be an ever-present mist in the middle of the village that never goes away. Despite that, the village isn't lifeless. After the humans moved out, animals moved in. Suomusjärvi is now home to a population of foxes, badgers, squirrels, and mice who appear to live in harmony side by side. Some of them have even elected to live inside the houses, which presumably offer them a better degree of shelter than they generally find during the winter months. It's a beautiful place to come and take a few photos of the furry local residents, but we're not sure we'd like to be here when it gets dark. It's hard to imagine a more extreme environment to live in than Antarctica. And that's why, as a rule, humans don't try to live there. It's been a temporary or permanent home to human beings in the past, though, and the presence of those hardy souls can still be felt in the buildings and structures they've left behind. Take Wordie House, for example, named after Chief Scientist James Wordie, who stayed here during the Shackleton expedition of 1914. There are constant reports that objects are moved around the house during times when no humans are present, and bright lights shining from the windows when there's nobody inside. Scientists who work at the McMurdo base regularly report seeing or feeling a supernatural presence there. Perhaps that's because the base was used to store the remains of 257 tourists who perished in a plane crash on Ross Island in 1979. The atmosphere inside Scott's Hut is said to be so overwhelming that some people struggle to remain inside it for more than a few minutes. Antarctica is like an alien world, and it's clearly not for everybody. You've heard of the Great Wall of China, but have you ever heard of the Great Wall of India? That's the name that many people use when they're talking about Kumbhagar Fort in India. Despite its colossal size and its status as the second longest continuous wall in the world, it's barely known about inside India and hardly ever spoken of outside it. Well, that's our loss, because it's a stunning fort that surrounds more than 300 temples dating back 500 years. The wall runs on for over 20 miles, climbing up mountains and dipping into valleys in the process. It's arguably a more impressive technical achievement than its more famous Chinese pier. The views from the top of the wall at its highest point are incredible, but visitors should be cautious. Many of the miles covered by the wall are now empty and otherwise featureless, so the sections of the wall there are not maintained. On top of that, the wall is still fortified with booby traps and other defenses. The Indian authorities think they've deactivated them all, but they can't guarantee it. If you look at it from the right angle, with the sun high in the sky and the stonework reflecting off the water to form a perfect circle, this bridge in Ardino, Bulgaria is one of the most beautiful bridges in the world. How then has it managed to end up with a nickname like Devil's Bridge? To answer that question, we have to go all the way back to 1515, when the bridge was built by a man called Dimitar. Sadly, history didn't record the rest of his name. Dimitar built his bridge on the ruins of an older Rome bridge, with the intention of connecting roads that link the Aegean Sea to the northern Thracian Valley. Sadly, it seems that Dimitar's wife passed away during the 3 years that it took him to build the bridge. Legends say that he entombed her remains within the structure, and her spirit haunts the bridge at night. An even more fantastic tale says that the footprint of Beelzebub himself can be seen on the masonry. The creepy tales haven't put the Bulgarian authorities off the structure. They declared it a national monument in 1984. For many years, it was thought that the enormous circular stone depressions that make up the site of Moray in Urubamba, Peru, were nothing more than decorative. More recently, our thinking has evolved to allow us to gain an insight into their real purpose. It turns out the Inca people may have been far more advanced than we suspected. The further you descend down the steps of the circles, the lower the temperature becomes. At the bottom, the average temperature is a full 15 degrees centigrade lower than the temperature at the top. Each level of the depression is a microclimate, which allowed the Inca to trial the growth of different types of crops. From tracking what worked and what didn't, they could pass on crop growing advice to the furthest reaches of their empire, where temperatures were very different from what farmers were used to at home. It's a work of genius, and the fact that they're so aesthetically pleasing is just a bonus. Yet again, it appears that our scientists and historians have underestimated our ancient ancestors, and we can't help but wonder what else they may have got wrong about them. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and you will be the first to know when a new video comes out. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.
Years ago, in an age when Greece and Rome were but a distant dream, one civilization conceived the impossible and built the unimaginable.
The Egyptians worked on a much grander scale than anyone did for millennia.
Enriched by their conquests and empowered by their gods, the indomitable pharaohs of Egypt built the ancient world's first stone monolith, its tallest building, oldest dam, most impenetrable fortress, greatest city, and the ultimate monument to one ruler's ego.
It's a clear message. Do not mess with Egypt.
Egypt's engineers boldly redefined.
See, it's hard for me to even listen to like mainstream Egyptian history now. The dynastic Egyptians did this and did that, and shit is really changing. There's a lot more information coming out, and the people that we're taught are the Egyptians, that look of people, they may not have been the ones who actually built and constructed all of the magnificent megaliths that are there in Egypt. It may very well have been a much, much, much older culture and civilization that did all the building, and then the dynastic Egyptians came in and found most of this stuff, found the remnants of it themselves. It was already ancient to them. And so more and more of this evidence is coming out that the pyramids and the Sphinx are much older than we think they are, which would predate dynastic Egyptian cultures, which means they weren't responsible for the concept, construction, and building of these grand structures. And so people are, the dynastic Egyptians just probably ain't do shit. They probably just found all that shit. More than likely. They stumbled across it. Oh my god, why can't I find this shit in my history? I know I just watched it not too long ago. This one right here. Here it goes. I didn't finish listening to this episode.
He's been doing this stuff his whole life. He has a background in classics, like I do, and so he's the only person I've talked to who sees like the legitimacy of this kind of pursuit, because he's one of those guys who can think about the humanities and the sciences at the same time. But it's tough. There is no discipline for this. You can't get a PhD in the hunt for ancient intoxicants. No one's out there studying for it. It just doesn't exist. And those who do study it find it very, very hard to get gainful employment. You can't get paid to do this stuff. And so a little bit later, we'll talk about two archaeochemists I've been in touch with who have remarkable findings that I want to share here. But they've each since left the discipline. So they were doing incredible work 20 years ago, in the late 90s and early 2000s. We're finding incredible things. But, I mean, life being what it is, they had to leave the profession.
Well, let's get to that now. Who are they and what are they?
So there's a couple different guys. So there are two finds that I really went out of my way to put into this book. One is trying to find hard evidence of this ergotized beer, and the other is trying to find actual hard evidence of wine that's been spiked. And ideally, that would be spiked wine in the context of some kind of Christian ceremony, or some syncretic Greek Christian ceremony in the 1st century AD. And so I spent years and years trying to get in contact with these folks and reading through the archaeobotany journals. And I'll start with ergot first, since I was really kind of fascinated with ergot and this hypothesis from 1978, because it sits there for now 40 years, and there's no hard data to come by. And people often argue about ergot the same way we argue about Amanita and the other candidates, because it doesn't make sense. We know it's there, we know it's common, but it doesn't make the most sense as a thing that would have spiked this beer. So I spent a long time looking for ergotized beer, or any beer that was spiked. Now, if you go to the top archaeochemists or archaeobotanists in the US, the UK, or Europe, and I did for many years, and I asked them the very simple question: is there any botanical or chemical data of beer having been spiked with psychedelics? And the universal answer that would always come back is no. And so I asked them again, and the answer would be no. And so I started to think about the ancient world and what that meant, and what ancient Greece meant. And so first I went to the site at Eleusis to ask the archaeologist there if we could test her vessels. And I couldn't believe that nobody had ever asked her if they could submit the vessels to chemical testing. And so I flew there, and I talked to her about it, and she said, unfortunately, they've all been treated for conservation purposes. You know, they put them in museums, and they exhibit them to the public, and when you do that, you contaminate the artifact, and it's no longer testable. So that was my dead end. And that's where things stopped for a while, and that's where my wife starts asking, you know,
Ryan,
you flew to Greece by yourself and left your two daughters at home for no reason, so you could ask a lady if she could test her chalices, and she told you no. And now what are you going to do? And so I said, well, I'm going to get creative, man. And so I thought about the ancient Greek world. Here's the thing about the ancient Greek world. In the wake of Alexander the Great, who was called the Great for a reason, the Greek influence after the 4th, 3rd centuries BC stretched all the way from Iberia, Spain and Portugal, to Afghanistan in the east. I'm not sure if many folks realize that, but the Greek-speaking or the Greek-influenced part of the world was enormous. And so if you're looking for evidence of this koukion, why would you restrict yourself to Athens and Eleusis? So I took a step back and I started thinking, where else would there be a Greek presence? And I didn't expect to find one, but I landed on Iberia eventually because I started researching ergot in different languages. That was my first clue. You know, in English we have this one weird word for it, ergot. And actually in German there's lots of words for it, bizarrely enough. Maybe it's because of the history of brewing. But in German there's Afterkorn, Mutterkorn, Tollkorn, which means crazy corn, crazy grain, or Totenkorn, which means death corn. And so it's weird that, you know, as you look elsewhere, it seems to be more common to the German mind. And then in Spanish, I just started random Googling for what that is. It's called Cornezuelo de Centeno in Spanish. And a couple of things started popping up. And these notions of spiked beer started popping up where they weren't supposed to. I never expected to find them. So the first hit that came in was from an archaeological site kind of in the Midwest of Spain called the Valladolid. And there in 2003, they found a Greek vessel called a Greek chalice called a kernos. And it's the same kind of vessel that's used in the Eleusinian Mysteries. It's like this little cup with a tiny cup on the outside. I brought a picture for you if you want to see it.
Sure.
Jamie, in Mas Castejar, if you scroll to the bottom, and copy of P29. This came. That's it. So this came from a site called the Necropolis of Las Ruedas. And the Necropolis of Las Ruedas is this archaeological site that was dated to about the 2nd century BC. Now, these aren't Greek people. This is a pre-Roman population called the Vacae, or the Vaxians. But for some reason, in this Kernos, it tested positive for beer spiked with hyoscyamine. If you go to the next tab, Jamie, you'll see that they wrote it. It's in Spanish, but at the number 76 and 77, when they tested the Kernos, which is a very Greek word, by the way, when they tested the Kernos, it tested positive for traces of hyoscyamine. And hyoscyamine can only occur in these solanaceous plants, these nightshade plants. You're talking, it's the family of plants that includes very boring things like the tomato or the potato or tobacco, but it has these nightshades like mandrake, again, or henbane. And so it's one of those tropane alkaloids that could have been in henbane, for example. So here you're talking about a henbane beer, which is really weird. The even weirder part is that this is found in a funeral complex. Just like you'd find at Göbekli Tepe or the Rockefet Cave in Israel 13,000 years ago, here, after thousands and thousands of years, you're seeing this pre-Roman population using beer spiked with henbane in a death cult. And where the researchers say that it was used to either facilitate the deceased's travel to the other world, or maybe the people who were there ushering the deceased into the other world. They actually use that phrase.
Holy shit. Go back to that image of the cup again, please. Why does it have the cup on the outside of it again? There's the large vessel, and then there's a small vessel to the side of it.
We don't know. That's just that's what a Kernos is. If you scroll,
could it possibly have been portion control?
Exactly. If you scroll to the top, Jamie, you'll see 2 other Kernoi on the top right there. Yeah. And so this is the next part of the clue. So these came from a colony on the east coast of Iberia called Emporion, which was a bustling Greek colony. And these are other Kernos vessels, just like you would see at Eleusis. These are the kinds of things that they think the initiates were drinking from. Now, they don't make for very good drinking vessels, but maybe they make for good mixing vessels, like for dosage control.
Yeah.
Something is going on there. That's what they thought the Kernos was at Eleusis, for example. And that's what I wanted to test with the archaeologist there, who said no. And so now we're finding these vessels in Spain, where they're not supposed to be. And I can say, as a classicist, or a one-time wannabe classicist, the first thing you think of when you think about the ancient Greeks is not Spain. And all of a sudden, I'm coming across this idea of spiked beer in Spain, and it's just not supposed to be there.
That's so fascinating. So this image, what is can you go back to that original image, Jamie? Of the cup with the small cup next to it. What is there? What's the conventional description of what this is and why it's shaped this way?
I mean, the Spanish archaeologists,
yes.
they also call this a Kernos. It's the extent of the Greek influence at that particular site. This is the Pintia archaeological site. The extent of the relationship and the network is a little unclear, at least to me. It's unclear how strong the Greek presence was there. But at the time, by the 2nd century BC, because the Greeks were already in these other port cities, basically, it's not inconceivable that some kind of trade was happening and these vessels would have made their way inland.
Do they have a description as to why there's a small cup connected to the larger cup, though?
It would be the same as any Greek archaeologist has, too. We don't know why this was associated with the mysteries. No one knows why.
It really does logically make sense that it would be some sort of a portion, because it's very small. Obviously, you don't want to have too much of that shit.
Yeah, it really does make complete sense, actually. Yeah. That's what it is. That you take one portion of this and mix it with 10 portions of that, and then you're going to have an interesting journey.
Yeah, I can't think of another explanation off the top of my head. Obviously, I'm not qualified to speculate, but when I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, oh, that fits.
But you're on the right track, because that's where it led me to, was portion control.
Yeah.
And that's what I found next.
What'd you find next?
I found some things, man.
What'd you find, man?
So right, I'm thinking Kernos vessels, and so the vessel doesn't just show up in in the middle of Spain there. It shows up on the coast at this, and so this town's called Emporion, and today it's called Ampurias, and it's in Catalonia, in northeast Spain, close to the border with France. And to be totally honest, I'd never heard of Emporion, and I'm not sure if many classicists have, but it was a bustling import-export business of the ancient Greeks, founded by the Phocians, who came from Ionia, which is today modern-day Turkey. And they found this place in 575 BC, and we think that the religion comes with them, or some kind of religion. Jamie, if you go back to Mas Castejar, you can see just an exterior shot of what this colonial town looks like. And when you look at it, again, there, I mean, it looks, that could be southern Greece. That could be an island in Greece. That's on the northeast coast of Spain. That's a statue of Asclepius, the Greek god of healing, standing in a courtyard in Spain.
And the statue dates to?
At least 5th century BC. We don't know really what's going on, but in the next slide, the Phocians who founded this place were devotees of, that's supposed to be Persephone on the left. The Greek goddess Persephone, the goddess of the underworld, the same goddess who the initiates would find when they made their pilgrimage to Eleusis and drank the potion. They went there to meet Persephone.
Yeah.
And there she is on their coins.
Wow.
It gets more interesting.
How?
So these people don't stick to the coast. They go inland at some point, and they go inland for a reason. And there's a site that they found called Mas Castejar de Pontos. It's a tiny town called Pontos, and there's this farm that the archaeologists describe as a Greek farm, a bit further inland. Jamie, if we go back to the same file there, we can just click through a bunch of the images and the kinds of things that they found there, are indicative of the Greek mysteries. So starting with her, for example, that was unearthed at this archaeological site in Pontos, and the archaeologist responsible for this dig, who's been the same woman over the past since 1990, her name is Enriqueta Pons. She found this and other objects. She calls this the head of Persephone.
Wow.
Or it could be the head of Demeter, but either way, she thinks it's a Greek goddess. And this is 3rd century BC.
Well, obviously, there's some intense influence.
These are Greco-Italian amphorae, also dated to the 3rd century BC. And the next one, that's also some kind of Demeter Persephone. That's an incense burner, by the way. You stick incense in the top of it, light it up, depending on what your incense is, and it's used in culture. Century BC, and then it gets weirder. Find this, 5th century BC. That belongs in a dining room in Athens, not on a farm in Spain. That is, that's the origin of comedy right there, believe it or not. That's called a komos. Komos in ancient Greek is one of these drunken parades in honor of the god Dionysus. These are the first paid regulars at the Comedy Store.
And he's got his dick out like Ari Shaffir. There you go. Wow. That's crazy.
So then it gets weirder. To the site, they find this. And this is Triptolemus. Triptolemus is kind of the missionary of the mysteries. So after Demeter establishes her temple in Eleusis, they send this guy to go scouring the earth to carry the knowledge of the grain and farming across Europe. And if you go to the next one, Jamie, that it's very similar to the kind of Triptolemus things that show up in Greece. This is from the Eleusis Museum, on site in Eleusis. If you compare the two, you see a dude on a flying dragon cart on the left and a dude on a flying dragon cart on the right. They're both Triptolemus. The last place I ever expected to find Triptolemus was a farm in Spain, and there it is.
Wow.
So if Triptolemus tells you anything, it tells you that the mysteries went west, when they're not supposed to, by the way. Graham alluded earlier to this incident that happened in Athens in 414 BC to celebrate sacrilege, a total sacrilege. It was called the profanation of the mysteries. And one of Socrates' star disciples, this guy Alcibiades, was caught indulging in the mystery ceremony at home instead of at the temple, and he became the Ed Snowden of the ancient world. He was ostracized. They would have killed him if he didn't run from Athens. So this was serious stuff and sacred stuff. So for them to be celebrating the mysteries, think about it, kind of makes sense because no one's looking over their shoulder in Spain. If it's going to happen anywhere, maybe it'd be in the hinterlands of the empire.
So this is people that realized that they wanted to continue these rituals and they couldn't do it in Greece anymore. They had to get out.
Right, or these were folks who either couldn't afford or didn't want to go all the way to Eleusis. I mean, you're in Spain. Right. Imagine getting to, you can't get to Eleusis today. Imagine getting to Eleusis 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago. It's really, really difficult.
And this,
if I may give a parallel, it's rather like somebody seeking an ayahuasca experience today, and perhaps they can't afford to go all the way to the Amazon rainforest, or it just seems too big a journey, so they're going to look for somewhere nearer to home where they can have that experience. And indeed, ayahuasca is available all over the world now.
Yeah, and that's pretty recently, right? Like within the last couple of decades, it's available all over the world.
Spread rapidly within the last couple of decades, and I think Brian is suggesting that a similar sort of thing was happening in the ancient world with a different substance.
The guy's name is so right on the nose, too. Triptolemos.
I never thought about that until right now, because I don't do DMT.
But I mean, people tripping. I mean, it's just ridiculous that his name is Trip.
It's interesting.
I mean, look at him. He's riding a dragon. His name is Triptolemus.
And on the next one, too, Jamie, you'll see there's another Triptolemus from Capua. This is in Italy. So he did go west. Wow. We know he went to Italy, and if he went to Italy, why wouldn't he go to Spain?
And look at the style of art. It's completely Greek.
Pretty psychedelic at the same time.
Yeah.
Flying that dragon.
Yes, it is. But it's so uniform that in the three different locations you have the same imagery. Wow.
And so the question that Wasson, Hoffman, and Ruck would immediately ask is, what is Triptolemus doing there? Was he really sent as a missionary to teach people how to farm? That's a traditional system.
Isn't that wheat in his hands?
That's exactly right. So
okay,
he was dispatched. Yeah. He was dispatched to teach people how to grow cereals. However, across the Neolithic period, people know how to farm. People are already farming. So it starts in the breadbasket at Göbekli Tepe in Anatolia. We have farming across Europe. In Greece, as early as 6500 BC. It's by 4000 or so BC. It's all over Europe. Why would Triptolemus need to be sent on a mission to teach people to do something they already knew how to do, which is farm? And so what they would say is, he was teaching not about growing the grain, but about what grows on the grain, which is ergot.
Of course. And look, someone's pouring something too.
Those just ritual ablutions.
Wow.
I think it's more interesting.
We're waiting, Jamie. We're waiting, Brian.
In addition to Triptolemus and the heads of Demeter and Persephone, Enriqueta Pons finds this gem, which is a 250 square foot ritual sanctuary that she calls in Spanish a capilla domestica, which is a household shrine.
This is actually
and
my second stream.
It's a household shrine that is
my first stream cut off on me. So I've been here for about an hour and a half, almost 2 hours now. And I'm getting hungry, guys. I think I'm about to try to wrap up, get to a good little stopping point real quick. not looking too bad. You feel me? You know why? Because I'm a master artist. That's the reason. Master artist. Alright. So now, applying the third layer of paint, you can really start to see a little bit more detail. Even now after this, I'm gonna add some more lashes to there and her eyebrows. Once I put the eyebrows on, it'll look more realistic. But really just trying to get that skin tone nice and smooth. And I'm liking it. It looks good to me.
Oh, damn. Yo, thanks for chilling with me in the studio. I'll get with y'all next time. Peace.